In the November election, Iowa voters overwhelmingly put language in the Iowa Constitution protecting the right of Iowans to own and have a gun. And it also says that in the future, any kind of gun control proposal that the legislature would make is going to be subject to strict scrutiny by the courts. And that means that gun control advocates, amongst their opposition, the things they were saying in opposition to the amendment, say that this is going to make it harder in the future to close any, what they call, loopholes in Iowa gun law. So what do advocates for gun control mean when they're saying the word loopholes? Well, Cody Wisniewski is a senior attorney for constitutional litigation with Firearms Policy Coalition, and he just wrote an article about this in National Review. Cody joins me this morning on the Newsmaker line. Cody, thanks very much for joining me on Iowa Radio. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me, sir.
So, Cody, let's break it down. What do gun control advocates mean when they say loopholes?
Well, it seems like what they really mean, to kind of cut to the chase, is just about anything that they don't like when it comes down to how the law is written or how the law is applied. These gun control advocates basically use the term loophole because of the negative connotation that it has, because it evokes this sense that somebody is avoiding the law or isn't doing what they're supposed to be doing. But what they're really doing is describing actual just features of the law and things that, people and firearm retailers and manufacturers are just following like they're required to.
Well, and Cody, I introduced you as being with the Firearms Policy Coalition, so you're involved in this ideological battle every day. One of the things that I see occurs is the opponents of pro-Second Amendment legislation really take advantage of the public's lack of knowledge, not only of how the laws work, but it seems like how guns work in general. Do you face that? Is that like a big challenge for you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, not only, there's this misunderstanding in our country that guns aren't very regulated, but in reality, as any gun owner knows, guns are heavily regulated. There's background checks for any purchase that's made through a federal firearms licensee, through a federal firearms dealer. There are a plethora of laws surrounding your ability to own or possess tools for self-defense in this country. And then when you start digging into how they function and how they feature, then the gun control advocates have no idea what they're talking about. I think just this morning I saw somebody that was excited about destroying an AR-15, and what they were really destroying was a Ruger 22 rifle. They just don't have any idea what they're talking about.
So you, in your article that I'm referencing here in National Review, you started to use some examples, Cody, of how gun control advocates use the term loophole, particularly in regard to background checks and how they're conducted. And I do think this is a political strategy, because I think gun control advocates know that when you hear the term background check, you go, oh, okay, well, that makes sense to me. But wait, there are loopholes. How do you use the word loopholes in connection with a background check?
So what gun control advocates are talking about is the way that our federal law works. Anytime that you buy a firearm through a licensed dealer, you undergo a background check. And that system that they use is maintained by the federal government. It's called the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. Like the name implies, it's supposed to be instant. So the retailer checks you against the system. The system will say, yep, he's good to go. You can transfer the firearm, or no, they're not an authorized purchaser. You can't. Now, when Congress passed this law, they built in a feature. And the feature is that if that check sits for more than 3 days without an answer, the retailer can transfer the firearm without hearing back. Now, gun control advocates like to call this a loophole because they're claiming that people are avoiding the background check system. But in reality, it was an intentional decision made by Congress when they passed the law. That 3-day valve that is a feature that they built in to do two things. One, to ensure that the federal government maintains an expedient system so that people's background checks are being processed in what Congress determined to be a reasonable downtime. If if you're buying a gun to protect your life, 3 days is still a very long time, but that was Congress's determination. And two, it prevents the federal government from weaponizing the background check system. If there was no 3-day limit and the federal government wanted to stop gun sales in the United States, all they would have to do is stop processing background checks. So that provision accomplishes very specific goals, was used very specifically by Congress, and to call it a loophole is ridiculous and just misunderstands how the law works and how the law was passed and what the intent of it was.
And Cody, another great point that you make in your article is, again, as I'm involved in the political arena, I hear the phraseology that advocates use to try to appeal to the public. And there's a phrase that gun control advocates use about common sense gun laws. And you argue in this article what they're really asking for is vagueness. So explain that to me. Why do gun control advocates want vagueness?
Yeah, and I feel like gun control advocates are starting to say what they mean. You're starting to see them come out and actually call for actual firearm bans and seizures. And one of the things that I directly quote in the article is a statement from a high-ranking individual in one of the gun control organizations who basically says that they need laws that are broader so that they can be interpreted to follow the spirit of the law. I'm not directly quoting, but you can read the article and read the quote. The idea is that the gun control movement is saying that there's some amorphous spirit of the law, which of course just happens to line up with exactly what the gun control movement wants, and that the laws need to be so vague enough so that government can apply it to pick up people who are trying to exploit these loopholes. The idea being, if law is vague and broad, then it can be unwieldy enforced by the federal government or the state government to stop people from doing things that the gun control movement doesn't like. And what the gun control movement doesn't like is people buying firearms, is having firearms at home to protect themselves, is carrying firearms to protect their community. Just about, those few little
right. Well, and Cody, that was a perfect way to answer the question, because you opened it up by saying, hey, at least some of them are out there being very honest with us. I'd like a ban. And what you're saying with the vagueness is, I'd like to give the government the power to put a de facto ban in by preventing people, but we don't call it a ban because we know that's unpopular. Am I right on that?
Yeah, and it would give them the power to, basically enforce the law however they see fit. If the law can be interpreted in 5, 6, or 7 different ways, then they get to pick how they want to interpret it and enforce it that day. I mean, that violates our basic tenet of our country, that the law should be knowable.
The law should be knowable. Great point from Cody Wisniewski. He is a senior attorney for constitutional litigation with Firearms Policy Coalition. If you want to see Cody's article, it's in National Review, and the headline is, "Everything We Don't Like is a Loophole, Gun Controllers Mantra." Cody, that is great comments, very relevant to the Iowa audience today. Thanks very much for joining me.